Hello everyone, MasterZeon1001 here, and in this video I want to go over what's new in the latest update of hardops 00986.1 Mercury, which is out now. So I'm happy to be announcing that we finally got this out the door, which brings a slew of new features. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get in there and just make sure the CPU doesn't win. So I have 2.83 open, and I'm using the previous version of hardops 985 neodymium. And just to exaggerate, I wanted to just take this cube and just bevel it. And I need to see the help so I know what's going on. And I need to see the modifier so I know what's going on. But because of the UI elements in the way, I can't actually see what's going on. And on top of that, there are occasional times where if you rotate, you'll be unable to have the mouse wrap work anymore. And so after adding free rotation to be supported, it did have its compromises, and these were slight workflow annoyances that came up that were just driving me crazy, and there were things that I definitely wanted solved. So introducing something I would like to call Showtime. So over in the new 2.9, I have the latest hardops Mercury loaded, and under opt-ins you'll see these two options here for auto T panel and auto N panel. And by having these on, it'll basically close the T panel and the N panel during a modal operation. So let's go ahead and bring up the machine panel. That's probably the biggest panel I can think of. And we'll go ahead and just bevel this cube and just notice how everything's just removed off screen. And we even have these nice little border ticks to indicate our wrap. So if you move the mouse past the range of the wrap, your cursor will come back, and you're also able to even adjust the size of your modal warp. So we can actually raise this to something like 125, something sarcastically high, and you can see that the ticks are even bigger. And then you can also even choose to turn it off if you don't want any sort of modal warp at all and you just want to be the same as previous. In fact, I'll press tilde to get my micro UI to sit back at the bottom of the screen, but now that I'm able to see my help and modifier panel during every modal operation, it definitely makes everything a lot clearer whenever I'm working, and then whenever I get out, it'll bring back up my panels exactly where I left them. And so this is one of my favorite features of this release, and I'm hoping that everyone gets in there and just experiments with using our new modal warp and auto T panel and auto N panel to be able to just get that isolated workflow whenever they need it, just when they need it, for just the right operation, just to get things just right. So first things first, once you install hardops Mercury, you'll notice that there's now a area at the top of the preferences that will let you know that hardops is up to date. In the event that an update is needed, it will show prompts to let you know that you will need to go ahead and download the latest update, as well as provide links on where to get it. If we close the preferences, we can expand on the hops button, where now in the hops button it'll tell you the current version of hops that you're using, and just by the logo color being green, it'll let you know that your current version is up to date. However, even clicking the about will display information in the about displaying that you are using the current version. In addition to displaying that information here in the form of the logo being red or green and changing this area depending on if you're out of date, the key map area also will say if your version of hardops is current. In the help area at the very bottom, it will also let you know if hardops is current. And with that, there's now a system in place to let you know if you need to get the latest version of hardops just within hardops itself. Due to the interest that was shown in the hops button as of the last hops video, we definitely took some steps towards improving the hops button for this release. Normally when you bring up the hops button, you're under the general tab. However, if we jump over to the key map, you can actually see a list of all the hotkeys available in hardops, so that you can quickly just see what hotkeys are available in hardops and quickly get used to it. In addition to that, you'll also notice that Control K is the key map helper. So if we press Control K, we can actually bring up the key map helper, which will allow you to basically reconfigure your key map on the fly for hardops, as well as get acquainted with the hotkeys that are available within hardops. However, the easiest way is to just go under the hops button and just look at the list of hotkeys. For example, we can see that the bevelable multi-tool is using Control-Shift-B. So we'll just duplicate this, press Control-Shift-B to perform a Boolean, click to apply, and then let's say we wanted to press Control-Shift-B again and actually shift this into being an inset or an outset, or we want to change it to an intersect or a difference. We can do that just through the Control-Shift-B hotkey that we found out through the button drop-down hotkey panel. One of the things that we made the mistake of with the initial release of Boxcutter 716 was the information conveyance. And what I mean by that is I'll click and drag to draw a box using Boxcutter, and we'll press B to bevel, and you can see that it says beveling in the lower left corner. And as I scroll to wheel, it tells me things about the amount of segments. However, most of this information is kind of secondary to Boxcutter. We focus more on the experience of actually using Boxcutter more so than overloading the user with information conveyance. However, I'm of the opinion that more information does need to be conveyed to the user. So as a result, a system has been added to hardops that's located under the opt-ins panel called BC notifications. By enabling that, now whenever you draw a box and you use a modal inside of Boxcutter, hops will display notifications to let you know things concerning Boxcutter. So right here we're displaying the bevel width. However, I can press X to change to slicing, press X change to inset, toggle the wire off. I can press V and array it. I can actually roll the wheel and see how much is in the array. I can roll the array completely off screen, and I know that my array is set to something astronomical. So normally you would think that there is no array, but this actually tells me it's a time for me to press Shift R and reset the array so I can go back to perfecting it how I desire. So I just wanted to do something in hardops to actually improve Boxcutter, because part of our tool set is linking between the two. And so by improving our link, I definitely want to improve the Boxcutter experience for users who are using both Boxcutter and hardops. So I hope that you enable Boxcutter notifications and give them a try, because they're there to improve your ability with information conveyance inside the modal, just in case you need to know your array distance or your mirror axes or anything like that. We now have information conveyance on screen focused to give you the information you need to help you understand what's going on while you're using Boxcutter. So with hardops, we've always had sequential queue menus, meaning that whenever you press Q, all our lists are listed as lists, which is just the way that hops has always been if you look at any of our previous content. However, in this version, we also wanted to add a opt-in option for sequential queue menu, which when enabled will actually display the queue menus in sets of columns, which will allow you to get to certain options easier. For modifiers, it turned out to be an immense improvement. However, this does change the layout of all of our menus. So we wanted to make this an option that users are able to opt in and out of in the event that they don't desire such things. However, it does make it a little bit more bite-sized if you're coming to terms with hops and you're just needing to make your way around very quickly. Additional options have been added, such as blank material, in order to help users come to terms with the functions and utilities inside of hardops a lot easier. Of course, hover over things to see what their tooltips are saying. And then of course, if you don't want your queue menu stacked, you can just turn that off, and even pressing something like Alt V will come back up as normal, versus if we look at it in the stacked system, we press Alt V and we see it come up a little bit more compact. So that's one of the small improvements I wanted to bring to hardops. With every version, I aim to kind of clean hops up a little bit to try to consolidate in addition to grow it, and this version of course is no exception. Blender made some radical changes with 2.9, even though 2.83 is going to be around for a year. And one of those changes is the ability to drag and move modifiers around inside the stack, which is pretty nifty, but it's not something that we use quite often. But it did break our modifier helper. So if we press Control tilde now, we can go to the modifier helper, and we can see that the modifier helper has been improved for 2.9 to actually take advantage of the new format and also look a little bit better than it did previously. So we did go through and kind of do an emergency patch to just kind of fix our helper, because all the modifiers were completely broken. So I am happy to announce that this has been fixed inside of 2.9. I also want to add that in addition to this, if in the event that you're using Blender 2.83, which is still the current version of Blender, 2.9 being the future version, you are able to also use the traditional modifier layout inside of 2.83. However, in the event that you want to try the 2.9 layout, we do have an option for 2.83 users that will show for 2.83 called Helper 2.90 layout. And if you check it, it will display the helpers kind of in the same format as shown over in the 2.9 version. However, it's just a different alternative take on the modifier panel, just a little bit different, nothing major, but it's just something we wanted to add for the 2.83 users that were transitioning to this update. 4 of the oldest, most classic tools in hardops have been revived for this version. So to show them in action, I'm in edit mode right now. So I'm going to go into face and I'm just going to inset this face, and we'll press Q and go under operations and we'll go under mesh tools, and the first one I'll show you is great face. And when we just click it, that's it. It just does great face. There's no options in the F9. This tool was one of the things I wrote when I was first learning hardops, and basically the idea is that it turns a grate into a face, and then afterwards you press Alt S. In fact, I'll undo that and we'll subdivide it a couple of times just so I can show how I used to use this back in the day. I would go here and just grate the faces, and then I would just press Alt S and I'd push it in, and that would actually suffice for my needs. In fact, I'll press I to inset this face, and the reason I'm insetting is because these break the connections geometrically and I don't want to cause issues there. The next one is knurl. So if we use knurl, all it does is just sets us up like so. In fact, we can subdivide it a couple of times and we can just knurl it, which will give us these points on the inside, and that is it. And so the next one I want to show is panel. So the easiest way to show this one is to actually use Boxcutter and to just cut a blue box in here, and we will just go and choose panel face, and that's all it does. Panel face just does that, and there's no options for it. These tools were written by me. It's kind of a meme almost, is that some of the worst parts of hops were made by me, and so I'm always trying to get them rewritten to be the versions that I envisioned them to be. And so the final one is edge, and so all this does is just turns the selection into an edge, and there's no F9 to adjust it, and it was called entrenched back then, and that was it. It basically did nothing. So now I want to introduce you guys to the new version. So jumping over into 2.9, which I have the latest hops in for no particular reason, we'll press I on this top face just to give us a quick face, and we'll jump into EM macro, which first will default to face grate. And so by rolling the wheel, you can see that I'm able to dynamically change this on the fly, which is just great. Moving the wheel will allow me to look down into it and further sync it. Holding control will allow me to choose how tight the edges are on the area that I seek to create. And that is basically the new face grate in a nutshell. So the next one I want to showcase in the EM macro is control clicking, which will bring up knurl. So if we control click it, you can see that I'm now able to scroll the wheel. I'm able to move knurl both in and out, which is handy on the fly to be able to just quickly knurl something, and click to apply. We'll take this face, we'll press I, and we'll take a look at the third one, which is shift clicking to turn it into an edge. And if we shift click it, we can see that we've now turned the selection into a panel edge. And so we're able to just move the mouse in order to just quickly adjust this. We can hold control and adjust this. Of course, there's more options over here on the side in case that you're wanting to have more fun with these particular tools and their behaviors that are available. That's also more possible through the help. I do plan on doing dedicated content on this stuff in the future. So the final one I want to show is the new face panel. So I'll just cut a box in here, but I'll press Control X to turn this into a knife, and we'll just cut a box in, and we'll just select these two faces, and we'll alt click EM macro in order to push this out on the face. And so these tools were made for very basic purposes long ago. So the modal versions are pretty much just that being expanded upon for this new generation, because these tools have never really received any sort of integration updates as time has went on. So this is now them being brought to 21st century. In fact, extruding things via this way is my favorite way to do extrusions now, especially compared to the classic way of pressing E, right clicking, and pressing Alt S in order to push it out, which will get you something a little bit more wayward. However, by just going in and just alt clicking EM macro, I'm able to just extrude these faces, get exactly as I want, and continue on working. So I hope that you at least give it a try. It's something that I use a lot to just quickly, rapidly detail things. In fact, we can just delete this, bring in a cylinder, and add a couple of loops in. Maybe switch this over to face mode, select all of these, and we will just control click to turn this into some knurls, and bada bing, bada boom. So that's really all there is to it. And then of course we can just hit it with a sharpen at the end and get it looking exactly how we want. Of course, the geometry that you give it is going to determine your result. So we could go for something a little bit more square like here and actually just control click it in order to get something a little bit more unique. However, we will want to, be careful with it, because it is easy for this tool to get a little bit out of control since it is a modal operating on mesh data. So you do want to kind of use it with care and give it a little bit of practice before integrating into your general workflow. But it is something that I wanted to bring to you guys for the longest, and I'm glad that it's finally been rewritten the way that it's always deserved. Multi-object edit mode is where you have two separate objects, but you select both of them and you go in edit mode. And that's really all there is to it. It's kind of weird. It's really taken me a long time to really wrap my head around having multi-object edit mode. But since we do have it, you are also now able to say select an edge, and we can, do the same selection on the second object and press Q and just convert it to a curve for both objects. So now you have multi-curve extract for multiple objects in the event that that's something that you found yourself needing. When it comes to using the mirror in hardops, the easiest way to use it is to select an object and press Alt X. While you're inside of mirror, now whenever you launch it, it will come up with a dialog showing you what state you're on. Of course, you can press D to bring up the menu to change what type of mirror you want to add. However, the hotkeys of X to reset to defaults and A to actually add a new mirror are two of my go-tos when it comes to dealing with mirrors. So most of the time, if I'm wanting to either just deal with the default mirror situation, I will just press X and go to Modifier. If I want to just add a new mirror, I will press A. However, new to this version of hardops, by pressing Alt and scrolling, you can actually scroll through all of the mirror states to find a mirror state that's not in one of the two objects that I just listed of pressing A and X. So for example, let's say we wanted to bisect mirror this. So we can choose bisect this. We see that it's now been bisected to the bottom. We can press Alt X. In this case, I don't actually want to bisect it again because I'm mirroring on a Z. So I would press X to reset it to default. You can see that this side blacked out because I've already mirrored on that side. So if I were to click it, I would actually undo the mirror. But if I were to click on this side as being the side I want to keep, it would actually mirror it to the bottom, allowing me to quickly just add a subdivision modifier and continue on with my modeling. But I just wanted to go to show that in this version of hardops, we took steps towards making the mirror even more friendly for new users. But the long and short of it is to just look at the top bar whenever you press Alt X in order to configure how you want the mirror to be. And in the event that you don't want an empty created, just pressing X will set you back to the defaults. But we did add some handy text in the corner to let you know when and when not an empty will be created when using the new mirror inside of hardops, because a lot of the new orientation systems do require empties in order to make them possible. But I hope that these improvements are some steps forward as far as making it easier for users to come to terms with the new mirror inside of hardops. Previously in our last major hops update, I was showing how in our modifier material helper, we had tried to add the ability to make it where you could add blank materials. However, the issue was if you tried to add a second blank material in a different indice, it would actually overwrite all the materials. So there's no way you could actually have multiple materials because you would just add a new material and it would just overwrite your old materials. It was cool because you could just say control click to just add a blank material, or you could shift click to add a transparent material, or alt click to add an emissive material where you can actually see it's emissive through the settings here, since I'm not in rendered. But anytime you would add a new material, it would just overwrite your previous material. So I am happy to announce in this latest version of hardops that now you're able to deal with multiple indices at the same time. So to show that in action, this object already has multiple material indexes, so we'll just take one and remove it, and we'll just shift click to just replace that with glass. So now that indice is glass. We can click on this one, choose to remove it, and we can click on new and just add a whole different new one. We can remove it again, new, and just re-roll the iteration of blank material creation to just get the blank material that we want. I've always wanted a blank material that gives something a little bit more interesting than the default blank material, and this is definitely an improvement for that. So now you're able to deal with blank materials with blank indexes, just taking you a little bit further in that character customization system I'm wanting with users and materials inside of hardops. When using the hardops Alt-M material menu, sometimes if you have a ton of materials in your scene, the list would get a little bit out of control, making it hard to get up and down the list to get to the materials that you need to get to. So in this latest version of hardops, we also made improvements in that regard, where in the preferences under UI at the very bottom, there is an option for material list count, and with this you can actually choose how many materials are listed in a count per section, and by doing so we can actually press Alt M and you can see the material list being a lot more cleaned up for you to quickly get to the material that you need to get to. And this is just one of those small quality of life improvements we want to add in this release. This was at the suggestion of one of our users who was so kind as to reach out to me on Blender Artist, and it was a pretty good suggestion, so we went ahead and implemented it for him. To the uninitiated, material cut is the process of cutting an object into another object, but also utilizing the material of the object that you're cutting into. So in this case, we don't actually have a lot of materials in our scene. So I will Shift D, duplicate this cube, and I will Alt M, just give it a blank material. And with this blank material created, now we can actually go and choose this material from our list. And if I were to duplicate this cube and cut it in, you can see that the cut has received that as a material. In fact, if I were to Shift A, add another cube, we can cut in again, and you can see that this one also received the difference. In fact, even if I were to assign this a new blank material, we can see that very little has changed. It, in fact, only gave the indice back to the main material, which means that only if an object has that material in an indice will it allow you to cut it in. So that's part of where forcing materials when we cut comes in handy. So you can't just change a material and expect it to update. But if we were to go in under material panel, add an additional indice and choose the new material that we created, now we're able to cut using that material. But if we were to change our material cut to that material, then whenever we duplicate this cube and we perform a cut, you can see that it goes ahead and cuts it in pink. Even if we were to duplicate this green cube and cut it in, we can see that it still cuts in pink. And this also extends to Boxcutter as well. If we were to fire up Boxcutter, Boxcutter also supports material cut. New to this version is the option of something called blank material cut, which is something that I don't expect to use very often, but was something on the list that I always wanted for material cut, and that is a blank material for each cut. So if we just draw a cut, we can see that this is a unique cut, this is a unique cut, this is a unique cut, and every time I cut, it receives a different material. And so it's going to be a very randomly shaded model by the end of this, but it also propagates to our Boolean system. We can select these two objects and press Ctrl Shift B in order to just scroll through our bool modals, and we can see that that just works. In fact, we can press Ctrl Shift B, scroll through a couple of them. You can see that with every scroll, the combination changes due to the randomness of this blank material scroll. And this is something that I just wanted to point out for you guys as something new in this version. Of course, for it to work with Boxcutter, we had to make a small update for Boxcutter. So there is a service release update for Boxcutter that allows it to fully support both 2.9 and this latest version of hardops. Interactive bool, inset, and outset have received improvements this update. To demonstrate it in action, I will Shift D, duplicate this, and then Shift click, select the main object, and we'll just press Q, go under booleans and choose interactive boolean, and we'll just scroll through until we get to inset. And now during inset, you can press T to adjust your inset. You can also scroll to will, go to outset, and also move the mouse to adjust outset to your heart's content. Traditionally, if I wanted to say get this face that I'm looking at and make modifications, I would need to apply some of these modifiers in order to basically get that selection because it's not live. However, if you were to press Q, you have an option for mod scroll toggle, and by shift clicking it, you can actually jump into modifier scroll. However, new to this version is the ability to either control click to apply the modifiers up to a certain point, or actually shift click in order to apply before a certain mod and actually get a duplicate of your mesh at that state in time. So now I've actually duplicated, received the mesh that I wanted, and I can just delete all the geometry around it, get this piece, just add a solidify to it, and then just control click, add a difference in order to put this on a completely independent level. So I just wanted to show that in addition to being able to use mod scroll to scroll through, you're also able to scroll and find a state and time that you want, and then just shift click in order to just duplicate and keep that version in order to make modifications. So sometimes whenever I'm needing to make modifications on a mesh using a derived version from a previous point in time. This is one of the ways that I would do it. And I'm just glad that this is something that's finally been added to this latest version of hardops. So introducing modifier, scroll, smart apply, duplicate, and also you could just also, let's show all of our modifiers for this before I finish. And what I'll do is actually scroll partially through and then apply all the ones that we've left behind. So we'll just scroll through till about here, maybe just to the latest bevel. We'll press Control, click, and we've actually applied everything up to that point, leaving us only this much of the mesh. However, we still have an additional boolean here and an additional bevel level live for us to mess with. So it's almost like keeping it non-destructive while applying things to just take us a little bit further. So hopefully you find creative ways to utilize this, but it is one of those kind of sands of time tools that I wanted to kind of introduce in this latest version to get people playing with various states of their model to get various shapes from different points in time. When we first added the camera to hardops, you were able to access it through the Q menu by just pressing Q and going under operations. There will be an option for add camera. However, if you had nothing selected, you could just press Q and you could just add a camera from the neutral Q menu. Of course, you could just add a regular turntable camera or shift click to add a bounce camera, but that was really all there was to it. And then you would just add the camera and you could jump into view. If you opted in for the 2-camera jump, it would actually just jump you into camera view. But notice that the view is just set up at this arbitrary view that's just a camera in front of it on the y-axis, just looking at this thing just kind of flatly. In this latest version of hardops, we wanted to take steps towards improving things. So now 2 cameras been improved. So instead of just going in and setting your camera to be just jump, it'll do that automatically. However, instead of having the camera also be frontal, users will now have a toggle to be in view, which means that if we were to add a camera in view, instead of just adding the camera just arbitrarily at the front, it'll actually place the camera precisely to view where we're looking. So whenever we jump in and begin playing our timeline, we can just begin letting it play exactly from the angle that we're looking at. Light rig and hardops can be accessed in 2 different places. 2Light can be found in the Q menu whenever nothing is selected under add lights. However, if you do have something selected, you could press Q, and under operations there's also an option to add lights. In addition to that, pressing Alt V, there's an option to just add a blank light as well. And so by clicking that, we can just scroll through different lighting scenarios. And this has always been a fun way to just quickly create little light rigs on the fly for just lighting up your little creations just on the fly. New to this version of hardops, now you can actually move the light in order to change the rotation on the fly, so it's a lot more natural, similar to the adjust viewport. We wanted them to feel relatively similar. In addition to that, there's also a tab for expanded mode, so now you can actually go in and adjust the lights to your heart's content. By clicking the dice, we can actually change the lighting setup similar to if we continued scrolling, like so. In fact, I scrolled it when I didn't actually want to, but what I did want to show is that in the lights panel, there is an expanded mode with a light panel that whenever you go under world edit, it will add a volumetric fog to the scene. And this can actually come in handy for things like, let's see, we'll bring this up, and we can actually toggle the ortho. We're just trying to pull back a little bit so that way we can just click through different lighting scenarios and see what we get with our lights showing up. And we may want to actually change the viewport to be rendered instead, so that way we can actually see the light showing through. So let's just look around and see what we're getting here. We'll go back to light rig edit and just change our lights until we get something that actually impacts the volumetrics. So the area light was the one I was looking for. In fact, every time I was clicking dice before, I was actually shuffling through the world, which you can actually shuffle the world, which will give you just various scales, different offsets to just help you get that mystery machine look. But by jumping through lights, we can actually find a lighting scenario that actually kind of gives us a real interesting look. And after applying that and turning off showing render, we can kind of just see our cube just really set up for Showtime with this particular lighting scenario. And then of course we can always press Alt VB, go back in, just scroll it until we find one that's exactly how we want, and then just click to apply, just kind of pull back and just see what we have here. So this is something that we're still in the process of working to improve, but we just want to show that we are taking some steps towards expanding on the expanded UI within the blink light system. When it comes to rendering in hops, we have seeked to simplify it a little bit. And one of those ways is through the opt-ins, you are able to set your viewport to set your render. And what this means when enabled is that if I were to press Alt V and go under my Look Dev Plus, I can actually adjust my viewport. In this case, my viewport is actually too dark because my settings were set to be off. So I'll just press W to actually set the settings back to default, which will get us back to the general move the mouse in order to adjust the background, and press A and S in order to change the environment, or just shift scroll to go through the environments. And it's set up already where basically if we were to click to apply, it would just set it to be the render because the to render is true. And what that means is that whatever we're looking at in the viewport is what's also going to be set up as our render. So when we press F12, we'll be able to just render this without any further delay. However, I also want to introduce you to the fact that if you are to press T, you'll also turn on something called to light, which means that whenever I click, it will set this to render, and now I'm able to go in and adjust the light. And now in light, I'm able to roll the mouse in order to adjust my lighting to choose what type of lighting I want for this, just through random scenarios, and then move the mouse around to get it to a good vantage point, and then of course click to apply. And that is all it takes for me to set up a render and my lights in this newest release of hardops. One way to enjoy hops and play with some of the interconnected workflows is after modeling something, we'll just press B to box select, and by pressing Alt M, we can hover over the material scroll where we can see that control clicking material scroll will allow us to blink material scroll, and we'll just scroll through random combinations, pressing O to switch over to Look Dev. And we just look through what we're getting with our scrolls here of just a random scroll to just shade this object. And we can press V to actually exit to material viewport exit. And here we can actually just begin rotating the viewport and deciding what sort of environment we want in order to just perfect our look dev of what we're seeking to present. From here, I can actually press T in order to turn on to light, and this means that once I'm done positioning this HDR, I can actually click and it will put me in a mode where I can then begin rolling the wheel to begin adjusting lights and set up lights in the scene. So right now there's just a random lighting rig being generated around the selection to just quickly give us a lighting environment, and once I click, now I'm back in the scene. And if I jump over to render, we can see that my render is already set up and ready to go. So really that's what it's all about. So with our last major release, we attempted to try a new array, and this array was called ST3 array. So if you press Q, you can bring it up, and by just control moving the mouse, you can begin moving it. You could, while holding control, press X to change the axis and just jump through, and it's a 3D type system. And we felt that this was a pretty good start. However, we wanted to take it a little bit further. Of course, this was a rather ambitious array where you could roll the wheel to add additional segments, but you could also press 2 to switch to a radial array, press 3 to switch to a twist 360, go back to a radial array, go back to a standard array, press Alt A in order to remove that array, or is it Alt X? Let's see, let's make sure. I believe it's Alt. Let's try it again. All right, Alt A, my mistake. But just like that, the new array was a little bit confusing, so we felt that it was a little bit more ambitious. So to cut to the chase, in this new version of hops, we've added an additional type of array called ST3 array v2, and this is just our attempt at making an alternative type of array, kind of going back to the basics. And by changing it through the opt-ins panel, as you see here, it will now be the option that shows up in the Q menu, but also will be the option that shows up in the Shift Q pie menu. So if we bring this one up, you can see that this one is your standard run-of-the-mill array. We can see that X changes the axis. We can see that it performs kind of like your regular modal, where the mouse wraps and it just takes it through. But with this array, it's a little bit more of a stepped process. So if we were to press V and actually change this into a 3D array, you can see that this array is actually following the mouse cursor a lot more accurately. Of course, over here, it's a little bit more random, but it is following my mouse cursor. But the interesting thing about this array is being able to roll the wheel and actually get arrays to fit in between the amount that I'm setting up in the distance. And I'm not sure exactly how this entirely works, but it was something that we wanted to attempt for an array. Other things that are interesting to note with this particular array is by pressing G, you can actually toggle different types of graphics. So now we have a graphic up that actually shows the circle, in addition to showing an axial kind of tractor beam, which is what I call this, like a tractor beam kind of abducting the array. But it also shows some guidance to the 3D system to let you know what's going on with the navigation of the array. So while I'm in this mode, scrolling the wheel will only allow me to be able to zoom in and out. So by pressing F, you can actually freeze this and go into an intermediate state where you can begin rotating and moving your view and just getting things positioned. And then of course, according to the micro UI, we can press F to unpause, where we can go back in and begin making adjustments. Seeing the tractor beam go both ways made me realize that we could add some sort of grid mirror array to actually make a more interactive array capable of doing equidistant mirrored array in a grid formation a lot easier. However, when it comes to adding new arrays with this, we can just press A and that will just allow us to add an array. And similar to ST3, of course, in the previous system, once you add an additional array, it'll change the axis that you're on. But if you ever need to change the axis that you're currently modifying, you can just press X and that will allow you to just change the current axis. So if I just keep pressing X, I can just keep changing axis until I get the axis that I want. However, if I want to actually toggle the axis to additively change it, then I would press Control X, and then from here I'm actually able to begin adjusting things on the Y. So we're hoping to take array back to something a little bit more simpler and provide you with something a little bit more useful and simpler to utilize in the systems that we now have at hand. So I will be doing some more dedicated content focusing on these arrays in the future and how we intend them to work. However, just know that there is an experimental new type of array that you're able to try in the opt-ins that you can join in at your own volition, and it's something that we look forward to improving and finding out what you guys love and hate about it. If I may go on about arrays, inside the opt-ins area, you can opt into the classic array, which is basically the array that we had before we had ST3 actually dealing with arrays. And the classic array was just an array. You know, you just moved your mouse, you rolled the wheel, it just arrayed. There was not a lot to it. You would press 1 and that would actually set it to 1, and you could press 2 and actually add an additional array, and it really wasn't the most functional array. It was just kind of a little limited. However, with the next array, the ST3 system, I found it to at least be capable of being a lot more versatile for my needs and being able to change axes and all of that. It just seemed like it was a pretty good replacement at the time. However, there were a few limitations whenever it came to fine incremental movements and also placing things precisely where they needed to be. Apparently, the amount of steps were just a little bit too much compared to what I'm used to. So when I talk about what I'm used to, right now I'm actually in Hops Tool, which has been updated to work as well with 2.8. So if we just quickly add an array, we now have an array, and if I just grab the hops dot, while I'm moving this dot, if I just press 1, you can see that it just slaps the array to 1. And that's just something I'm used to. In fact, we can add an array on the Y, and I can actually grab the Y dot, and I can just press 1, and it just slaps it to 1 because it's utilizing relative. And this is something that I use all the time when it comes to just arraying things and then curving and deforming them. So, you know, if we just go back to a general cube and we go under our opt-ins, and we change it to array v2, which is the version that we're now experimenting with, we do also have that same type of functionality. So while right now I'm inside the micro UI where the last letter of it being a C indicates that I'm in custom, I can press R and it'll change it to relative. And notice that the moment that I change it from custom to relative, that it changes the distance as well because of the way that custom and relative and constant actually work. However, if I press 1 while I'm in relative, notice that it also slaps it to it. Improving upon the previous systems that I showed as far as how I need things to be slapped, I can also press Shift 1 and it will slap it to the other side. So I can press 1, Shift 1 in the event that I need a sequential array very quickly and I need to just have a very particular type of array. And then of course I can press Control X to change my axis and then press 1, and I could even press Control X again to change it back, and let's say dial this back to something like 0. I could even activate something like snap mode with S and dial this back to something more precise on the relative side. So I'm just showing that even in cases where, you know, I've stacked things up, we've added systems to kind of take that snapping more seriously, and also the more delicate natures of arrays. Eventually I want to have a system where you start an array and then it hands it off to an empty, where you can perfect your placement with an empty, hopefully while still being inside the modal or something to make it more interactive. But I just wanted to show some of these additional uses of actually using the new array that's inside of this latest version of hardops. Of course, depending on your preference or what level of tutorial that you're following, you can resort back to the classic version, the previous ST3 version that was showcased that you might have already calibrated and gotten used to, or maybe you'd like to try this new version, just see what it has to offer, because we are hoping to kind of refine all these arrays into finally becoming its final version, similar to Mirror. You know, there was a time when Mirror had about 4 different versions of Mirror that compiled our Mirror workflow before we finally consolidated it into the Alt-X tool that you could just alt scroll through that just does everything now.